Christopher Nolan is known as somewhat of a moneymaker in Hollywood. If you look at some of his movies, they've grossed a lot at the box office when compared to their budgets. And just a few examples for you. Inception earned $837 million on a budget of only $160 million. Interstellar, $702 million at the box office on a budget of $165 million. The Dark Knight, and this is a big one, it earned over $1 billion on a budget of only $185 million. And although Dunkirk, which was Christopher Nolan's most recent movie before Tenet, didn't pull in as amazing numbers as some of the other movies, it still grossed a really good amount of $527 million on a budget of only $150 million. So what the heck happened to Tenet? Tenet was only able to gross $363.7 million at the box office on a budget of $200 million. Yes, it made a profit, but when you compare this approximate 1.8 times return to the usual 4 to 5x return, this is a pretty big flop for a Christopher Nolan movie. The first thought is usually, yeah, it's because of the pandemic and all of the closed theaters, but there's a lot more to the story than just the blanket statement of it was because of the pandemic. In this video, we're going to take a look at why Tenet, one of the most hyped movies of 2020, flopped at the box office and some of the changes it sparked to the film industry in the past year. But before we dive in, and real talk right now, if you like videos related to movies and the film industry, make sure to subscribe to FilmStack to stay up to date on more great content. I release new videos every Sunday and would love for you to join the FilmStack community. Okay, with that out of the way, let's jump in. Let's start with the massive elephant in the room, the current pandemic. Because of COVID, we saw theater chains closing their doors both temporarily and permanently. Most studios delayed releasing their movies until theaters reopened, and Tenet was no different. It was originally supposed to be one of the biggest summer blockbusters of 2020, with an original release date of July 17th, but it ended up getting delayed a few times until it finally released on August 26th. But when compared to 2017's Dunkirk, which opened in 3,720 theaters at full capacity, Tenet was only able to open in 2,810 theaters with a reduced capacity. On Tenet's opening weekend, movie theaters in New York City, LA, and San Francisco were still closed. This can be a huge hit for a movie because those locations alone can account for 10 to 20% of a film's domestic box office revenue. So why wasn't it delayed to 2021 like some of the other movies that year? Well, many sources say that Christopher Nolan didn't want to delay it any longer, and he also didn't want to go direct to streaming or physical sales because this movie was made for movie theaters. And because of Tenet's poor box office performance, we saw a huge spike in the number of movies being delayed to 2021. Now that we've kicked that elephant out of the room, we can talk about some of the other reasons Tenet flopped. For one, it didn't have any super popular actors. Robert Pattinson is probably the biggest, most recognizable actor in Tenet, and I've been following Robert Pattinson for the past little while, and I now know he has the acting chops. From movies like Good Time to The Lighthouse, he's shown us that he is a really great actor, but the world doesn't know this. When people see Robert Pattinson, they tend to think one of two things. Either A, that's Cedric Diggory, or B, he's Edward from Twilight. His most popular role is from Twilight, which isn't super flattering when it comes to being considered a serious actor. And besides him, Tenet was filled with fairly unknown actors. When you look at some of Christopher Nolan's more recent movies, with the exception of Dunkirk, we see names like Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar, Leonardo DiCaprio and a bunch of others in Inception, and Christian Bale in the Dark Knight trilogy. These actors alone can bring audiences to theaters before you start to factor in the director, the marketing hype, and the intellectual property. I think all of the actors in Tenet were perfectly fit for their roles and they did a great job, but the lack of any really big names is definitely one of the many reasons Tenet flopped. Without any big name actors, the movie is riding on the shoulders and reputation of Christopher Nolan. That alone is pretty good. He's had a great career, but the average moviegoer most likely doesn't care too much about the director. But one of the things the average moviegoer and the diehard movie fan cares about is the reviews and ratings of a movie. And in that department, Tenet wasn't helped either. It only got a 70% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 69% on Metacritic. Those are pretty lackluster reviews. That, mixed with the fact that a lot of people found this movie to be very confusing, was a very big detriment to the success of the film. This movie wasn't based on some previously loved IP like Batman. It wasn't based on a historical event in history like Dunkirk. It didn't have the big names like Interstellar and Inception, so seeing reviews that were on the lower side of what we consider to be good again leaves the success of the film riding on the fact that Christopher Nolan wrote and directed it. But don't get me wrong, it's not like people didn't want to watch it or didn't know about this movie. This movie was extremely hyped. Besides No Time to Die and Dune, this was probably the most hyped movie of 2020. maybe even more hyped than the other two, who knows? But seeing these lower reviews can definitely dissuade people from seeing it. Another reason Tenet didn't do well can be chalked up to it being an original IP, and probably one of the most confusing original IPs that Christopher Nolan wrote and directed. If you were confused by Interstellar or Memento, this movie is so much more confusing. After watching it, I spent a bunch of time watching explainer videos on YouTube to make sense of it all. This confusion wasn't helped by the fact that a lot of people complained about the audio quality, specifically around the dialogue. This movie required you to follow along and really focus on what was happening and being said. Christopher Nolan tends to have a bit of an exposition problem, and this movie was no different. There were multiple times throughout the runtime of this film where a concept would be explained before or after it came up in the movie, and having difficult to understand dialogue can completely ruin this. There are countless articles and parodies about how the voices in Tenet are difficult to understand. I have a friend who watched it in theaters and said that he wished he saw it at home with subtitles because of how difficult it was to understand the dialogue. And by the way, that's actually how I watched this movie. I watched it at home with subtitles, and I absolutely loved it. But with the amount of exposition in this movie, you really need to nail the clarity of the dialogue versus blasting the crazy sounding score over it. Okay, so there we have it. Those are some of the main reasons why Tenet performed poorly at the box office. Tenet did end up making more money from its video sales after being released on Blu-ray and DVD. I had a hard time finding its global video sales, but in the US it pulled in another $21 million from video sales. Unfortunately, Tenet ended up being the sacrificial lamb of big budget Hollywood blockbusters in 2020. It was released in theaters in the middle of a pandemic versus delaying it to 2021, and because of that, I really think it suffered. A lot of other studios also got the message after seeing its poor results. We saw more delays happening for really hyped up movies like No Time to Die and Dune. Disney doubled down on its streaming platform, and Warner Bros. Partnered with HBO Max to release every movie on the streaming platform and in theaters at the same time in 2021. The pandemic, along with the delays, really hurt the movie theater industry, and whether or not it will bounce back will really depend on consumer behavior and our willingness to go back to theaters. Thanks for watching. Did you see Tenet? If so, was it in theaters or did you watch it at home? Let me know in the comments. If you have any other reasons why you think Tenet flopped at the box office, make sure to leave a comment as well. I'd love to keep this conversation going. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe for more great movie and film industry related content. I post new videos every Sunday. This was Dominic from Filmstack, and until next time, have a good one.